Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the Prismatic subclasses, mainly about why I believe it to be a net negative for the game, and highlight the issues I and others see with it. Let's be honest, Prismatic has been extremely dominant since it released way back in June of 2024. Prismatic has completely changed the game with its introduction, for maybe not so much the better. It has made so many parts of the game so much easier for basically everyone, turning harder challenges for players such as master raids or dungeons into normal mode strikes purely because of the potency that Prismatic offers. And having been working on soloing Ghost with every subclass for a while now, I can definitely say that Prism is one of the best subclasses we currently have in the game. Although I haven't gotten to Prism just yet, I feel like now is a good time to actually talk about them. So let's jump right into it with the first section. As Bungie has said, Prismatic is supposed to be a subclass designed with the idea of combining every other subclass into one, with aspects, grenades, melees, supers, and class abilities all meshed into one subclass. From the Bungie blog post with the developer insight into Prismatic, Bungie has stated, "Our main goal for Prismatic is to enable new and interesting build crafting combinations that lead to new types of gameplay, so that we can keep the game feeling fresh. As part of this, some of the abilities we've chosen are ones that we think have been underused since the initial release and have exciting interactions with the rest of the roster. In many cases, we have adjusted how certain aspects function to specifically enable these unique interactions." Additionally, they add, "Part of building Prismatic was ensuring that every option and combination felt viable across a variety of content and difficulties. So most of the abilities you've seen here have also had a tuning pass that will share more in detail in the lead up to Final Shape's release. Aspects that were damage type specific have had their requirements loosened when using Prismatic. For example, Diamond Lance and Feed the Void activate from ability defeats of any damage type, not just Stasis and Void, and Stylus Executioner activates when defeating an enemy afflicted by any elemental debuff, not just Void. Also introduced with Prismatic is Transcendence, a super-like ability that charges from both light and dark elemental damage. While inside Transcendence, your grenade is converted into a special grenade that contains both light and dark elemental debuffs. Transcendence also provides a small weapon damage boost and a small defense boost. Bungie also goes on to say, "Our goal for Transcendence, both in terms of uptime and potency, is that it feels like a miniature super that's only readily available when your loadout and playstyle interweave light and darkness together in harmony." The main takeaways I want to point out are what they said regarding Prismatic's identity, being that they said they wanted to add underused abilities to Prismatic to give them some potency with the combinations they can create. Another takeaway is when they said they wanted to ensure every ability or aspect combination felt viable. This to me at least sounds like that any combination would be similar enough to running another combination in terms of power and potency. The other main takeaway is with Transcendence, saying it's a mini super ability that only works when you build into it. It has been more than a year since the introduction of Prismatic, and as such, balancing issues and problems have risen as they inevitably do. However, unlike say Strand, where balancing issues have been corrected and restrictions added along with general feedback being taken into note, Prismatic hasn't really seen any significant changes apart from maybe one or two patches addressing extreme outliers. The main issue that myself and many others see with Prismatic are as such. First of all, Bungie said that they wanted Prismatic to have underused abilities so that they could shine a little more with the right combination. What exactly is their idea of underused? Take for example Prismatic Warlock. The aspects that they have are Hellion, Feed the Void, Lightning Surge, Bleak Watcher, and Weaver's Call. Keep in mind that they said underused, right? Why is Feed the Void here then? Why is Bleak Watcher? These are the most popular choices to run on the respective subclasses. Bleak Watcher specifically has been one of the most dominant PvE abilities since it released. Feed the Void has also been the default pick for most people when running Voidlock because of how potent Devour is. Hellion is a good aspect as well, however I do understand it's the new aspect so it makes sense as to why it's on the new subclass. Same goes with Song of Flame, the new super. And speaking of supers, let's move to Prismatic Hunter for a sec and talk about their supers. Prismatic Hunter gets Marksman Golden Gun, Deadfall Shadow Shot, Storm's Edge, Silence and Squall, and Silk Strike. If we're going back to underused, then why is Marksman Goldie here? Why is Deadfall Tether here? Those are again some of the most popular picks to run on their specific subclasses. And granted, the darkness supers / ability picks are also understandable. The original subclasses they come from only have those to pick to begin with. But the point I'm trying to make is why say you're adding underused abilities to Prismatic when some of the picks they chose aren't underused. What I assume Bungie was going for with Prismatic is this. Prismatic was supposed to be a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none situation, and I assume most people would agree with that sentiment. So why does this jack-of-all-trades subclass get some of the strongest aspects the game has currently? Why does it get the master-of-one abilities that came from the other subclasses? For example, Knockout, Bleak Watcher, and Stylish Executioner. But just because an aspect is considered underused, doesn't exactly mean that it was so bad that no one used it either, just that the alternatives are better. Taking for example Consecration. Is Consecration bad on Solar Titan? No, in fact it's quite strong. But no one uses Consecration on Solar Titan because everyone uses the same mini hammer build that's been a thing since Solar 3.0 released, which doesn't include Consecration as an aspect. Consecration was never bad to begin with, but since people didn't gravitate towards it, it's considered underused. The issue here is that Mini Hammer is just too good not to use, therefore quantifying why Consecration was underused to begin with. Should there have been a different pick for Solar Titan's aspect on Prism? Maybe, but it's not like there was much else to pick from. Could the other aspects have worked? Probably, but they would have needed Tune to then fit Prism. It's a confusing situation to say the least. Going off what I said in the previous section, Bungie also claimed that they ensured with Prismatic any combination of aspects would pretty much be viable in any content, or rather in a variety of content and difficulty like they said. Now, I don't know about you, but when's the last time you saw a Titan running Dringner's Lash on Prismatic, or Weaver's Call on Warlock, or Gunpowder Gamble on Hunter? These are what I believe to be the most underused aspects for each respective class. Now, I understand that with every subclass we have, there are going to be outliers and specific broken builds people use, but they made the claim that every combo could be viable, again feeding into the jack-of-all-trades ideology that I feel they were going for. However, like I said in my previous point, with the aspects that were chosen for Prismatic, Bungie probably could have guessed what people would naturally gravitate towards when building their subclass, and especially now, being over a year later, people are still using the same aspects and setup they first used when they first got their subclass. For example, Bleak Watcher Feed the Void Warlocks, Knockout Consecration Titans, and Combination Blow Stylish Executioner with Winter Shroud Hunters. This is what I assume a large majority of people are still running with Prismatic, myself included. And the reason for this is that these are all the massive outliers that could have and should be tuned down to better find a balance that Bungie claimed to be going for with Prismatic. And to finish all the points that I made in the previous segment, Transcendence. Transcendence is such a strong ability that it overshadows pretty much any and all outliers I mentioned already. Transcendence gives so much for almost no cost. Ability uptime, damage resist, bonus weapon damage, and a special grenade. And while Bungie did say that Transcendence only works when you build into it, therefore having some cost involved in doing so, the cost of running it is just to use some kind of light weapon or ability in a darkness one, which isn't outrageous to expect with the current sandbox. And with all of the additions to weaponry we've gotten in the sandbox, it's become so much easier to build Transcendence. For example, Area Denial Frame GLs, even stronger utility of abilities such as Rhyme Code Raiment with stasis turrets, and general base subclass setups such as Consecration, or the Combo Blow Winter Shroud setup on Hunter. Each of these elements alone are potent enough to help fill each bar for Transcendence, but combined, the balance term of Transcendence goes out the window. Transcendence uptime is way too high. If they wanted it to be a mini super-like ability, they should have gave it the same super-like cooldown that base supers have. I'll go more into how to fix maybe the cooldown uptime later, but for now that's the point I was trying to make. Let's begin to talk about the abilities themselves. I've mostly been talking about aspects this entire time, so let's talk about the melees, grenades, and super. And you know what, let's get the most obvious ability out of the way too. Frenzied Blade on Titan. Now, most of you are thinking, why am I mentioning this ability? It's kind of lackluster in comparison to other melees on Titan, right? Well, I lied about talking about only abilities, because this melee is what I believe to be the reason as to why Consecration is so strong. That's right, we're talking about Consecration. Again, why is Consecration so strong? I believe it to be the potent uptime it currently has. When running Consecration with Frenzied Blade, you are given 3 melee charges. 3. That is enough to where if you even slightly build in the strength, You should always have a slam whenever you need one. I'm not even talking with a Hoyle class item or when Transcendence is active either. Including those things though, infinite melees, infinite uptime, and nearly infinite consistent damage. And while we're at it, Warlocks, you don't get a pass either. I'm sure a large amount of you use Lightning Surge and Arcane Needle, basically the Warlock equivalent of Consecration spam. You also get 3 melees with the same issues that I mentioned Titan has. Oh, and I'm not done. Hunters, yeah? Combination Blow and Gambler's Dodge has been a go-to combo on Arc Hunters since forever, and now you also get it on Prism. That one is quite literally infinite melees so long as there is abs around, but Hunters also have access to Withering Blade, which has 2 melees. However, there isn't any melee effect aspect on Hunter that can utilize it, so it gets a pass. Now I know some of these abilities are the only abilities that they could add because, well, there's just no other option from the base subclass. Just for fun, let's go over all the abilities that can only have one option to choose from. There's Withering Blade, Threaded Spike, Snare Bomb, Silence and Squall, Silk Strike, Frenzied Blade, Shiver Strike, Blade Fury, Glacial Quake, Pocket Singularity, Arcane Needle, Needle Storm, Penumbral Blast, and Winter's Wrath. You may notice a pattern here. Apart from exactly 2 abilities I mentioned, all of them come from Darkness subclasses. Now this may be a flaw with the Darkness subclasses themselves only being limited to one option. They are in desperate need of some kind of additional abilities, but the point is still there with it only being able to choose those specific abilities. Also, side note, let me know if y'all want to see a video on the Darkness subclasses for that reason, if Bungie doesn't already announce something about them before I get a chance to make one. Moving on to the fragments of Prismatic, most of them are actually fairly good, and aren't necessarily broken on their own. And while a majority of people will always default to the same fragments, the same can be said about every other subclass too. There will always be objectively poor picks with fragments such as Facet of Honor, Facet of Generosity, or Facet of Awakening. If any of you could tell me off the top of your heads what each of those fragments' effects are, I'd be really impressed. Because I'm willing to bet most people do not use them. So why am I bringing up fragments if they're fairly okay and aren't any different than any other subclass? Well, that's the thing. They are like any other subclass. Let me explain. Let's take Facet of Protection. While surrounded, you get damage resist. The effect and even the icon is exactly the same as the Arc Fragment. Or how about Facet of Dawn? Powered melee hits give Radiant, again the exact same as the Solar Fragment. One more example is Facet of Ruin. Increases the size and damage of Shatters and Ignitions. Very similar to not one fragment, but 2. One of them for Solar and the other Stasis. Even its icon is a combination of both icons. Now, this would make sense given the identity of Prismatic, combining other subclasses into one, but at the same time it does that, it's stealing the identity off of the respective subclass. It's not just fragments, but literally almost everything off the base subclass they came from. I'll dive a little more into this subject later on, but for now this is just a start. A slightly less severe issue I see with Prismatic is the interactions that exotic armor pieces have with it. Now naturally some exotics are going to pair with Prismatic. There really isn't a Prismatic specific exotic that we have at the moment. One that is supposed to interact with Prismatic itself, I mean. The exotic class items, while only working on Prismatic, don't necessarily have Prismatic exclusive effects. So because it's the all-in-one subclass, most exotics are going to work with Prismatic. And that's fine on its own, but there are some exotics that are just straight up better on Prismatic rather than the subclass they were designed to be on. Some exotics I can think of include, but are not limited to, Mask of the Quiet One because Devour on Void is already super easy to get, and therefore it's just straight up better on Prism by default. Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap because Prism's kit is better than Stasis Titan by default. Curus of the Falling Star because not only does Prism get a better kit, it also gets bonus damage from Prism's Fragment, Facet of Courage. Celestial Nighthawk for the same reasons as Curus. Mask of Fealty because Prism's kit is just better for most cases for people. Liar's Handshake because Prism's kit is for the most part better than Arc's. Kefri Sting, this is mainly a PvP thing because of the one-shot melee with grapple. Gifted Conviction, because Prism has a better kit. Getaway Artist, probably the most potent exotic from this list, even warranted a nerf from Bungie because of how strong it was/is. Osiomancy Gloves, because Prism's kit is just better. Sanguine Alchemy, this is the only neutral exotic I will include on this list, strictly because of the shenanigans that the well swap to Prism effect has. I'm sure you've seen and used it extensively by now because of how free it is to actually use. And finally, Rhymecode Raiment, because Prism's kit is just better. The point I want you to take away from this is, why would you run X subclass for this exotic if Prismatic is just straight up better in almost every way? I know that Bungie had buff/changed these exotics to work on Prismatic as well, whether it be intentional or not, but some of them are just too strong on Prismatic. Its effect combined with Stasis Turret and Devour on Prismatic is insanely potent. And like I said before, even got nerfed because of the combination of the exotic giving grenade energy on Arc Soul hits, and Devour giving grenade energy from kills. They nerfed it to where if you have Devour, you will not get the energy refund from the Arc Soul hits. Even before the Arc Warlock buffs this season, did anyone really use Getaway Artist on the subclass it was designed for? Probably not. And maybe this is Bungie's way of giving underused exotics a time to shine, but the sheer potency that some exotics have is ridiculous. While we're on the subject of exotics, may as well bring up the exotic class items. Quite literally one of the strongest equipable items that we've ever gotten in the history of the game. Being able to not only combine exotic traits into one, but also using exotics from different classes as well. I suppose that these are the Prismatic specific exotics since they can only be used while Prismatic's equipped, but they aren't necessarily something I'd call Prismatic exclusive, because it's just combining two already existing exotics that can be used on practically any other subclass. I understand people enjoy using them, but just like Prismatic itself, some issues also arise from their concept as a whole. I will talk more about these in another section, mainly because there's a lot to cover on them. My experience with doing ghosts with every subclass pretty much gave me the inspiration to do this video. In those videos, I briefly talked about the subclasses as a whole in the descriptions of each, and I've mentioned a few times about something I call subclass identity. What is subclass identity? What makes a subclass not only unique, but also viable and potent with the right builds? What makes a subclass what it is? Each subclass I would say has something going for it, but naturally some of them lack a lot in their kits. Take Stasis Hunter for example. What is the one thing that Stasis Hunter has that makes it unique from the other subclasses? You said Shatter Dive, you'd be correct. But it's not necessarily Shatter Dive that makes it unique, it's Shatter Skating. Being able to use an oversight by Bungie makes it so you can gain an insane amount of speed for almost no cost other than running the subclass. By just pressing 3 buttons, Heavy Swing, Jump, and Shatter Diving, you can achieve a lot of speed really quickly. Most of you I'm sure are aware of this as it's been around since Stasis Hunter's introduction way back in Beyond Light in November of 2020. It's really been that long. As a counterpoint, take Stasis Warlock. What makes Stasis Warlock unique? Probably Stasis Turret, maybe it's super or it's melee. Alright, and now let's look at Prism Warlock. It can run the exact same thing, but better. How about Void Hunter? Tether and Stylus Executioner. Prismatic also gets those things, and has a better overall kit to support it. Just to round out the classes, Stasis Titan. Its identity is probably Glacial Quake, Diamond Lance, and spawning a lot of Stasis Crystals. You can more or less do exactly the same stuff on Prismatic, but better. The point I'm trying to make is to ask yourself, why would you run X subclass when Prismatic does it better? Very similar to the point I made about the exotics. Why run an objectively worse subclass when Prismatic exists? Some classes just don't have a reason to exist now because of Prismatic. That may be a little harsh, but it's to convey my point across. Some classes need to have something that makes them unique enough to run, while also being potent enough to stand up to the typical content nowadays. And I think that Prismatic has ruined a lot of the existing subclasses in that regard. I feel there needs to be some balance adjustments that make these things objectively weaker on Prismatic to give the base subclasses they came from some potency and an upper hand over. As a more positive example, take Arc Titan. Before this season, episode Heresy, I'd consider Arc Titan to have been overshadowed because of Prismatic. Prismatic gets Knockout and T-Crash, so already the two strongest aspects of Arc Titan are now on Prismatic, taking its identity away with it. However, with this season, Arc as a whole got access to a new buff called Bolt Charge. and Titans got access to Storm's Keep. Standing behind a barricade grants Bolt Charge, and your weapons can now discharge Bolt Charge while standing behind it. This single buff gave Arc Titans an identity again, in that it's the easiest class to obtain Bolt Charge on and efficiently use. This gives not only Arc Titan, but Arc subclass as a whole some potency and uniqueness over Prismatic, since Prismatic doesn't have readily available access to Bolt Charge from their kits. This is an excellent change in my opinion, and I hope that Bungie continues this way of thinking in the future with some of the weaker subclasses. Looking at you, Stasis and Strand. However, I'm not saying they should tune up subclasses to be in line with Prismatic, because I still believe Prismatic is too good on its own already. Much like Prismatic with its kit and setup, exotic class items suffer from similar issues as Prismatic, that being something I'd call filler exotic perks, much like some fragments on Prismatic, way too easy to obtain, and a lot of potency for not a lot of cost. When they were first released, the only way to obtain them was by running the exotic mission, Dual Destiny, a fun duo-style mission with dungeon-like encounters that required cooperative teamwork to complete. But people seem to argue against the idea when they have to do it 50 plus times to get the exotic class item perks they want. But the trade-off of this was how strong these combinations could be, therefore I think justifying the grind for them, right? Once you got the role you were looking for, it felt great to finally get it, right? Well, the feedback from this way of farming was less than outstanding to say the least, and Bungie introduced many different ways to obtain these exotics once you completed the mission at least once. These include random chants from chests in Patrol on the Pale Heart, buying them from Xur when they sell them, buying them from holiday events, and the Saga campaign missions. Now I'm okay with that last one, dropping from Saga campaign missions. What I'm not okay with is the other sources. Why should you be able to get quite literally one of the strongest items we've ever gotten in the history of the game from fucking Patrol, or just straight up buying them from Xur or the event vendors when it's available? I'm not saying that the only source should be from the mission, even though it is the most efficient source to get them, but come on, they could have done better than Patrol. When they made this update, people were macro farming chests because of it. I'm sure most of you remember when that was going on. People got hundreds of class items from farming that way. I should clarify that I don't want to sound like I want to gatekeep or something along those lines. What I am trying to say is that it shouldn't be so easy to obtain. A lot of the complaints I saw were from solo players not having an option to do the mission dozens of times, so this was most likely the answer to that. However, I think they should have chose a different source then. Maybe the Legendary Campaign, Legend Lost Sectors from the Pale Heart, give it a chance to drop from Excision, or something that's at least comparable to the mission in terms of difficulty. Other team-based sources could have been added as well, such as from raid encounters from Salvation's Edge, guaranteed drop from GM Excision, hell, have a harder difficulty for the exotic mission that rewards 2 instead of 1. The way I see it, they tuned it for efficiency rather than difficulty. The mission is the most efficient source of class items, and everything else is far less efficient in comparison. Anyone can do Patrol for 4 hours and get maybe 4. But by the way they make it seem, a lot of people can farm Dual Destiny for 4 hours and get 12. But then comes the perks themselves. Much like Prismatic, most perks you can get are either not that strong, or basically obsolete. How many people use Spirit of Wormhusk, Spirit of Hoarfrost, Spirit of Filaments? Most likely no one, or at least a very small percentage of people. I understand that, again, there's going to be objectively better perks than the rest, but it seems like they needed to add filler perks just to decrease the chances of getting the perks you want. Speaking of, Bungie also added perk attunement for class items, guaranteeing at least 1 of 2 perks you actually want, effectively doubling the chances of the perk combo you want. Which, honestly, I'm not for nor against this. It's nice, don't get me wrong, but I feel indifferent about it really. I don't really have anything to say on the attunement, mainly because it really only affects farming the mission, as I don't think it works 100% of the time with the other sources in the game, but I could be wrong. It has been a while since I had to farm class items. But even if they were to somehow change this, it's honestly too late for it. Most people already have the perks they were looking for. It's been a year since they've changed farming methods, so anything they would change now would most likely not even matter. I will give some ideas that could help some of the outlier issues with Prismatic. I should note that at this point, more than a year after Prismatic's release, there is probably no way that we can switch the Aspect, Super, Melee, Grenade, etc. from Prismatic. to something else. The building blocks we have for Prismatic's kit is more or less set in stone by now, so there's not going to be any mentions of changing out anything major on Prismatic. Instead, I want to give a more realistic approach to the balancing by directly changing how the subclass works. For instance, let's start with Transcendence. I said that Transcendence uptime is quite high in the current sandbox. Why not make Transcendence gains be affected by the intellect stat? Or since it's so close, the new super stat Bungie introduced with the stat changes next expansion. As a side note, the numbers and percents I say here are merely arbitrary, as I'm not completely certain of how it would affect it. They are more so a way to visualize what I mean. Let's say at base tier 0 of intellect or super, Transcendence gains are negatively affected by 60%. At tier 5, Transcendence gains are negatively affected by 17%. At tier 8, Transcendence gains are where they are now, and at tier 10, Transcendence gains are increased by 10%. Overall, you can see I think they need a nerf. However, running high intellect / super would give you the same, if not more, gains. Another thing to do that affects Transcendence gains while not directly touching it is the abilities and weapons that give massive progress to Transcendence. Those being things like Stasis Crystals, AoE abilities such as Consecration and Lightning Surge, and probably the most blatant outlier, Area Denial Frame GLs. For Stasis Crystals and AoE abilities, you can simply put a cap on them per use. Since both Lightning Surge and Consecration can be used multiple times in short succession, the cap on those abilities could be made lower, let's say 10 to 15% per Lightning Surge / Consecration use. So if you hit 50 enemies or 4, you get the same amount of light energy regardless. For Stasis Crystals, make the cap like 20% because you can't necessarily spam it as often as the previous abilities. And finally, for Area Denial Frame GLs. The simplest change that I could think of would be to make gains only be affected by impact damage rather than the tick. Or since it spawns pools of tick damage, make it so it can only gain energy from the first tick per pool. Either way, Area Denial Frame GLs have been a Transcendence energy farm for so long, and maybe they should be looked at more carefully. I'm sure there are other sources that I missed that give ridiculous energy for little effort, but I'm not going to go over every single source. These are just the big outliers I've noticed from playing the game. However, I believe that pretty much all sources should be tuned down slightly as well, but the outliers should be addressed first. Maybe every source of Transcendence energy, that being pretty much everything in the game, should be tuned down by 3 to 5%. Nothing huge, but enough to have an effect. Moving on to abilities themselves, I feel like we need to address the outliers again. Now, I know I said we can't really change the abilities themselves out for another one. Rather than doing that, let's change the interactions that some of them have. The philosophy I think that should be implemented is the higher the uptime an ability has, the lower the total damage output should be. Bungie has touched on this very slightly with Prismatic with the melees, where running Frenzied Blade or Arcane Needle increases the time it takes to regen your melees, which does kind of fit into that philosophy. However, it's almost a non-factor when you take into account how frequent you can really get your abilities back with everything we have in the sandbox, whether it be perks or subclass effects. So, rather than nerfing the recharge rate, since that doesn't work, we would need to look at the damage. The idea I have in mind is simple. If you're running X melee, then your damage output is nerfed / buffed to Y. Using a real example with Consecration, if you run Consecration with Frenzied Blade, then your damage per slam would be nerfed by let's say 20%. However, if you run Consecration with let's say Shield Throw, your slam now does an additional 20% or so. Lower uptime abilities equals higher total damage from the interactions and vice versa. Similar thing would apply to Warlock with Lightning Surge or Hunter with Combination Blow. This point is probably going to be pretty pivotal for most of you, but I believe that the aspects on Prismatic should inherently be weaker than the base aspects of the subclass they came from. Bungie had said that he tweaked some aspects to better suit the purpose of Prismatic, so that they feel more concise to use, but it did not change the effects that they give though, making most aspects on Prismatic objectively better than their counterparts. I can understand changing how to actually use them since Prismatic's all about combinations, but the trade-off would then be that the effect you get from it would be weaker. I'm with the ideology that low effort equals low reward and high effort equals high reward, but with the changes they made to the Prismatic's aspects, it is now low effort equals high reward. Take Feed the Void as an example. OG Feed the Void activates on any Void ability kill, while Prismatic Feed the Void is any ability kill. As such, since the required activation is lessened, the effect gained from it should be as well. An idea for that would be make Devour heal less or give less grenade energy back on kills, or some kind of middle ground between the two. Another example is Stylish Executioner. The OG aspect is any Void debuff kill gives invis and the other benefits of Stylish, while Prismatic's version is any debuff kill. So a nerf to Prism's version could be to increase the 2 stylish cooldown timer, or decrease how long you're invisible for. Finally, let's look at Titan with Knockout. Knockout activates technically on any melee kill, nothing specific like an arc-powered melee or anything. So, if you're running Knockout on Prism, its nerf could be get less health per kill, make Knockout's timer shorter, or something in between. And I'm aware Bungie has said that they were going to nerf these aspects by changing how many fragment slots they give. Originally, they planned to nerf these down to 1 fragment slot each, but then got reverted back to 2. And as Bungie said in a recent TWAB, prismatic aspects that were originally planned to be reduced to 1 fragment slot will remain at 2. We feel this is a good middle ground where some of the more potent aspects are being tuned down, but not by too much. Of course, we'll be playtesting this change internally before the Edge of Fate launch as well, to make sure it's the right decision. With many changes coming to our stat system, gear tiering, and Armor 3.0, we still see Prismatic as an incredible option for ad clearing or boss TPS focused players among you. We're looking forward to seeing how you experiment with Prismatic and alternate subclasses at launch. I believe something similar could also be done to the exotic class items as well. With some of the more potent exotic combos, maybe tuning them down to better balance them could be a solution. Oddly enough, it seems the most potent and most used perks from them are the class neutral ones, meaning the perks that every class's exotic can get, those being Heart of Inmost Light, Star-Eater Scales, Syntheseps, and Assassin's Cowl. Bungie had already touched on Star-Eater Scales though, as they nerfed the damage boost when running different supers, which is a great first step, although almost nothing has been done about any other perks since. Take Synthos for example. The weakened effect is that Spirit of Synthos only boosts melee damage rather than both melee and super. Not a lot of people run base Synthos for only the super part, but rather the melee part, so making the Spirit of Synthos inherently weaker should have been the weakened effect. Right now, Synthos gives a 165% damage boost to melees when surrounded. That goes for both base Synthos and Spirit of Synthos, so maybe nerfing Spirit down to 100% could be a fix to the potency. However, the issue I have seen with running Spirit of Synthos Consecration Knockout setup that almost every Prism Titan runs is that it's mainly used for clearing large groups of adds at pretty much any difficulty, not so much for boss damage. So nerfing the damage would more than likely not change usage rates at all, except only if it was nerfed to the ground. Making it only give like 10% damage boost would fix this problem more than likely, but at the same time it's not a practical fix in the slightest. However, just like with Star Eaters, Bungie did actually touch on an interaction with Synthos on Hunter, specifically with Stylus Executioner and Grapple Melees. They had nerfed the interaction when running it pretty severely because of the damage output of Strand Grapple spam on Prism Hunter. Well, that's about everything I have to say on Prismatic. It's quite a messy subclass at the moment, but Bungie did announce that they were going to go over it and tweak it coming into Edge of Fate, so who knows what all they're going to change and fix. And if any of the suggestions I made in this video happen with what Bungie actually does, yes, I do work at Bungie, and I do have complete and total control over what happens with Prismatic down the line. Obviously, as always, I'm open to discussion about Prismatic as a whole. What I say is not absolute truth of the matter. I'm just a shark with an opinion. I know most people will probably disagree with most points I made, and that's okay. While I think something should have been done about Prismatic a while ago, I know lots of people have been having fun with it. So long as everyone else is happy with it, I'm also fine with it. So why did I make this video in the first place then? Because it's something I've wanted to talk about and discuss with other people in the community. I thought it'd be fun to talk about and finally bring some things to light, so to speak. And just a closing thought, I've frequently said that I would have much rather had an entirely new subclass to play and build around, rather than have Prismatic. I have no idea what the subclass would have been, maybe a third Darkness subclass just to balance the Light and Darkness subclasses, but as we see with Darkness subclasses now, they are kinda left behind when it comes to being updated. So, I don't know. I just think the idea of Prismatic was kinda neat and unique, but its execution maybe could have been a little better. It more so highlights the issues of the other subclasses rather than creating a unique identity for itself. Anyways, that's about all I have to say on this, so till next time, see ya.